Welcome to Leadership Development News, profiles and practices of top performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, my esteemed co-host for the last 18 years on our show is here, and we're really happy to have one of our new friends and colleagues, Kevin Crawford. He's going to touch base on a lot of different issues, but one is around what's the secret sauce of leadership. We're going to talk about humility, empathy in the face of disruption. And we have some questions for him. I'll give you his bio shortly. But Kathy and I have been working with executives really for longer, Kathy, than we would want to admit. But we're always trying to help people perform in the top 10%. And the top 10% is a tipping point, meaning if you or the team that you lead get in the top 10%, you are a lot more productive. People want to work with you, they want to do their best. And so a lot of it is what are the ingredients? What are the tools? What are the tips that Kevin's going to help us from his vast experience to help people perform in the top 10%? And what we like to say today, everything is more. People have more anxiety. They have more pain. They have more loneliness. They have more unexpected expectations. We're in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so a lot of this is for you, the leader listening, or for your team. What are some of the things that you could do to manage yourself? What are the things you can do to manage others? A lot of those fall under the competencies that we like to talk about around emotional intelligence. And so, Kathy, welcome.
Well, hello. It's good to be here. I have been on the road and very happy to be in one place for a few days. But I was just listening this morning to a Fast Company podcast. It was a webinar on the future. And for the very first time in almost a decade, trust is now the number one issue in
Yes.
corporate America. And, just coming out of a training for coaches and first responders, we know that greater than 58% of our success in life is associated with emotional intelligence, and greater than 78% is, as you know, informing our leadership skills with emotional intelligence. So I'm very excited today to learn more about Kevin and all that he's doing to help leaders in this challenging time. And I think we're going to have a great show today. So let's get started.
All right, all right. Well, thanks, Kat. Let me introduce Kevin. Kevin Crawford, he's an advisor to executives and boards in a wide variety of leadership challenges and industries in the U.S. For over 30 years, Kevin has helped organizations prepare for crisis, disruption, and disaster. So he combines an incredible, diverse background as a fire chief and city manager, both for Carlsbad, California. He's heading over there tomorrow, he mentioned. He was also a CEO of United Way of San Diego. And then, really, for the last 7 or 8 years, taking those experiences, working exclusively with CEOs and helping them as an advisor. He's been an incident commander for some of the most historic disasters with his passion for teaching and really in an empathic, principle-centered leadership way. Kevin was at 9/11. His approach is practical, it's personal. He helps leaders make decisive, confident choices under pressure, always with an eye towards resilience and strategic clarity. Across private equity, healthcare, technology, manufacturing, real estate, media, insurance, and it goes on, all the different organizations that he's touched, but never losing sight. And Kathy, you mentioned this about building trust and creating a space where openness drives progress. And so, Kevin, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure. Hello to both of you.
We're glad to have you. And if you see Kevin, he's got the big smile on. And so Kevin, as we get started, we always do this. Tell us a little bit about some of the major influences in your life, and then we're going to pick your brain for some of the secret sauce of leadership.
Okay. Well, with regards to influences in my life, my parents have to be at the top of the list. My dad was a naval officer, and taught me the the value of hard work, what discipline was all about. My mother was a charge nurse at the Mayo Clinic,
Oh,
and
wow.
so from her I learned an awful lot about attention to detail. And I think they were the bedrock of everything in my professional life. And when you're going through those times, you really don't recognize or stop to recognize how significant they are.
Yeah.
But if you give yourself the favor of looking back and taking advantage of context, the view of context, you recognize how significant those early relationships were. And my parents were certainly at the top of the list. And then I had a professional, a colleague, a gentleman that turned out to be a colleague, who saw me in my first year as a fire chief. And he ran a huge organization, about 16,000 people. And he took me under his wing and started to mentor me. He had nothing to gain from me at the time, but for reasons he has never been able to tell me, he saw something in me that he wanted to invest in. And so he'd probably be the next most significant person in my life.
That's beautiful. Is he still alive?
I hate to tell you, he just passed away about a month ago.
Oh, well, that's got to be a big loss for you. Sorry to hear about
That is okay. But his memory and his lessons on leadership live on.
Well, I'm very impressed. And as you know, Kevin, I work predominantly across first responder communities, training them to be coaches. And we just graduated our third class this year. We're now up to 45 Magnus coaches for first responder communities. And my dad, too, was a naval officer. And my spouse just retired from SEAL Team 6 about 2.5 years ago. And so we worked together. I'm really excited about all the things that you're going to share with us today. When you think about moving between public safety and the current environment for CEOs in general, what are some of the common challenges that you see?
Well, leadership is a courageous place to put yourself in. And successful leaders are people that are extremely courageous, and perhaps not in the way that most people would think. Not so much with regards to the dangers you may face and the threats to your life, but the courage to look inside and really understand who you are and how best to master who you are in the face of an organization. And so whether it's fire chief or CEO or city manager, it really doesn't matter a whole lot. Leadership is all about you as the individual bringing your best to the table.
And so, Kathy, I'm smiling because you can see why Kevin and I kind of resonate with the wealth of experience that he has. And then, one of the bottom lines is this self-awareness, which is core to who we are as individuals, core to emotional intelligence. And there's so much to that. So say a little bit more. One of our questions that we have for you, is just about what are some of the services? How do you bring this wealth of experience to the CEOs today? What does that look like for you?
Oh, well, we seem to find ourselves, and this has just evolved over time. It wasn't something that I really set out to do, but because of the background, I get brought in to help executives and organizations manage those times of crisis, either personal or organizational. And even if something doesn't rise to the level of a crisis, just maybe a significant disruption in a personal life of an executive or of the organization, then I get brought in to kind of make sense of that. And obviously, I don't have a background in psychology like, the two of you. And so what attracts me to them, I think, more than anything else, is just that I've been in those shoes. And that seems to provide some comfort. Even before you start talking about issues and kind of delving into the things that are really upsetting or the crisis itself, there's a comfort that seems to come with knowing that the person sitting across the table from you is kind of walked in those similar shoes. So we do that. We do a lot of CEO development. So if a board is trying to make a decision between two candidates, oftentimes they'll bring me in, or if they've made a decision on somebody and they want them to be to get the best shot at folding into the organization, they'll bring me in. Or if an executive is struggling in one way or another, they will bring me in. So it kind of runs that gamut.
Sure.
But here's the interesting thing. What I've experienced is that in every single case, over the course of time, you actually end up being somewhat of a therapist. And I use that term loosely, obviously, in the presence of both of you. But it becomes a safe place, because they don't have many people that they can turn to.
Yeah.
When you think of being crisis ready in the work that you do, share a little bit about how that works and how you can help leaders become more crisis ready.
Yeah. It's all in preparation. It's all in before the crisis hits. Now, we don't have the luxury oftentimes of coming into an organization with somebody that is well prepared, or an organization is prepared for a crisis. So we got to quickly get them up to speed and help them respond. But if I could give one piece of advice to all executives, is that spend that time right now preparing yourself for that crisis, because that crisis will come. That significant disruption will come. And so it's a matter of, again, doing that internal work that prepares you for that, and prepares you for a change from the normal day-to-day operations to a whole new way of thinking and responding. And that's kind of what we help the most, or the area that we help the most in, is helping people somewhat abandon the normal course of business and redirecting them in a direction that helps them manage the incident with a different focus and different attention, because all the priorities change, the mission changes, the direction changes, and they just haven't given any thought to that.
Yeah.
They're so headlong into their normal day-to-day operation that they can't make that pivot.
Right.
So we help them make that pivot.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think we're going to talk about thinking a little bit more. One of the definitions of an advisor, of a coach, is a thinking partner with you and for you. So why do we need that? Why do CEOs need that? Why do leaders need that? They don't take the time to think. Actually, let me say it. They don't have the time to think and to think strategically. And so coaching and leadership is what Daniel Kahneman called slow thinking, where you analyze, you strategize, you think deep, you look at alternatives. Unless there's an emergency, like you're saying, hopefully you've done some of that in the past so that you could pull out some of those gems, because you've really have done that. how do you get them to kind of think slow? And Kahneman says we only do that about 2% of the time. 90% is fast, 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 which your world has been fast, fast, fast.
It's funny that you mention that, because one of the ways I describe what I do is I say that I'm a thought partner with
Yes.
somebody. And just bringing me into the conversation with an executive forces them to kind of stop all this and
Yeah.
just think about the things that they need to think about. When we talk about delegation, I'm just going to touch on delegation because it has relevance here. One of the things I say when it comes to delegation is you ought to have off your plate everything that somebody else can do. Said another way, everything that's on your plate should be stuff that only you can do.
Hmm.
And so by doing that, you free yourself up from a lot of the constraint and minutia of business, and gives you space to do that. So we help them, give them permission, if you will, to delegate and give themselves time. Because if they're not thinking holistically about their organization, their people, and themselves, they're not going to be performing at the level that they aspire to.
Oh, absolutely. And we think of that in our terms, in the first responder world as getting left to bang. We have so much to dive into here with author and wonderful CEO coach, Kevin. We're going to come right back. We're going to talk about your book, A Chief Reflects on Leadership, and talk about how a leader thinks. So don't go away. Come right back. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Back to Leadership Development News. We're talking with our Chief CEO advisor, Kevin Crawford. And you can reach Kevin. Kevin, I'm just looking for your email here at kevincrawfordconsulting.com. Kevin Crawford, CRAWFORD consulting.com. And one of the things, Kevin, it is so interesting that with your experience, that it's coming down to self-awareness. And so maybe take us into it could feel a little soft for executives that I work with, but just like you said, that's where we end up. How do you help them look at that? Like, what are some of the maybe questions, some of the things that help you or help them feel comfortable sharing that with you?
You're so right. It does seem soft, and that's one of the challenges with executives, CEO, or anybody in the top leadership of an organization. Is historically that has been seen as insignificant, and they're resistant to the conversation. Frankly, they hide a little bit from that kind of conversation, has been my experience. And so we usually start with what is something that they recognize as is a problem in the organization. Now, if I'm brought into the organization, there's something that's not going ideal by their standards or their measurement. And so we spend a lot of time there, and then we just kind of back ourselves up into the conversation of self-awareness. But if a person doesn't have as a regular habit of doing that work of being self-aware, they will never effectively self-manage. If you don't turn those eyeballs back and take a look inside there, and for some, this is a bit of a challenge, right? For some, emotional intelligence comes a little bit easier than for others. But everybody can stand to gain by developing the personal skills to look inside at how they're thinking and how they're processing thoughts. But for that, you will never manage yourself as effectively as you would want to, or your team would want you to, or your board would want you to.
Well, as you're speaking here, Kevin, I'm thinking of the words of Sun Tzu, right? Great warrior who clearly articulates in all of his writings that if you don't know yourself, then you are always at um, at the perils of the enemy.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that this is something that has been distinguished long before corporate America became a reality. And it's so important for us to have personal mastery and leadership mastery. And if we look at, all of the great philosophers, they always talk about self-awareness, yet here we are thousands of years later still preaching that this is the number one quality
Yeah.
in one's thoughts.
Absolutely. And so, not that validation was needed, but if you can go back thousands of years and it was an observation of humanity back then, then what happened between then and now?
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened is that we built for ourselves a, a caricature of executives, and it did not include self-awareness.
Wow.
It did not include a sensitivity to humanity. And we have appointed CEOs for the last several generations who are dogmatic, non-interested in these kinds of things, and are less sensitive, tough, argumentative, challenging, and the world, particularly boards, have thought, okay, that's what we need to have in our CEO. And it was just the opposite of what we needed. Well, the pendulum is swinging just a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're starting to get CEOs appointed that have more of an interest in self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness and social management.
Yeah.
Well, I think, oh, I'm sorry, Relly. I just wanted to say one thing
Yeah.
about that for both you, Relly, and Kevin, as you comment here, Relly. I think what's really telling is not only is the CEO leaning in that direction, but now we're hearing all of this emphasis on the CIO and their role in the development of core people practices, because everybody's using technology and human resources is no longer serving the primary role, and it's now a chief people officer. And many people are swinging from CIO to chief people officer, which I think is a radical change, because in the past, the technology people were, the least sensitive to what was going on.
All of us, the three of us, are into helping people be their best and thinking about things. And I'm going to ask you in a moment about a couple of the thinking lines you have. Your book from 2012, a chief reflects on leadership, but this whole idea of thinking, so all of us are into training, coaching, and I woke up, or as I was in those wee hours this morning, and the mind's going, and just we like alliteration and things, and I'm thinking of T times 3, time to think, TTT. And as a speaker, thinking about that is kind of the leading edge that I want to promote, because we don't. And Kathy, you and I have talked a lot about AI stuff and the idea of time to think and where is AI and what's of value and how can I use that. So with the thinking, Kevin has a great book that will get you thinking, and it was interesting because it's around leadership, but I didn't count, but so many of your lines were about thinking. So I'm just going to read a couple and then have you talk about this. Leadership mastery is the mastery of thought. That's one of them. The quality of one's life is the quality of one's thoughts. These are deep. You define your thoughts define your destination, and your destination defines your reality. So this was 13 years ago, Kevin. And so the whole idea of managing your thoughts, especially in a crisis, so maybe kind of speak to that, because you don't really have time to think, but maybe any examples that you have of that, of managing your thoughts, especially in crisis.
Certainly. Uh, it became obvious to me back in those days that the majority of my thoughts were coming from the subconscious, perhaps 90%. And there was no guarantee that what was in my subconscious was accurate. It's what I've been exposed to, it's what I've learned, it's what I've read, it's somehow I internalized it and it got written on that hard drive. And so when I'm going about my business, whether it's in the middle of a crisis or not in the middle of a crisis, I'm pulling from that. That is driving my paradigms and my perspective and my lenses and everything. That defines how I see the world. And then when I came to the realization that a lot of that may be inaccurate and it doesn't really get the advantage of thought, which is to really push things up into that objective 10% where you really give it thought, then I was realizing that I'm not doing good thinking, And again, whether it's a crisis or non-crisis. Yeah. And so that really, was kind of the crux of why I wrote those things, because I wanted to put myself in a position where I was objectively thinking about things. And so that was really also where I learned, and I can't say I mastered it, but I feel more comfortable with it than I did decades ago. And that is to close the door on emotions. And for me, especially when I was going into like a large incident, Hurricane Katrina or 9/11 or even just large wildland fires, I said to myself, I need to just close the door on emotions, because emotions have such a tendency to be engaged first. They're more sensitive. Their response time, if you will, is quicker. And so I had to make this mental picture in my mind of closing that door so that I was just bringing the clearest, most objective thought to whatever I was doing. And so whether it's in crisis or not, it's really the same game. Now, the critical thing about closing the door on emotions is that door will slowly open back up. And when it's open, everything that you get exposed to, and remember, we got all these senses that are out there bringing data into ourselves, and it's going right into this emotional center of our brain and creating emotional responses. And I can guarantee you, emotional responses, they're not your best thinking. It's not your best performance. And so we want to close that door and bring objective thinking to the table, particularly in times of crisis.
It's interesting to me that you have this analogy of opening and closing the door of emotions. What we do in our work is we create a focus on emotional factors so that individuals will understand their vulnerability and recognize how they may respond and how they may communicate inadequately when emotions are heightened, especially in a crisis. And so I think it's really interesting how we cannot close the door, right, on those emotions. As you said, there's a little door that you close, but we know that our subconscious mind is like a hunting dog. And once we get a whiff of something that creates vulnerability or fear, whether it's intentional or not, that little hunting dog is going to go looking for all of that stuff, and it's going to keep bringing it back to our conscious brain. And if we're not aware of how that hunting dog is underscoring every skill we have to be, as you said, objective and rational, we're going to create more of a disaster than we're facing because we're not going to know how to handle it. That's a really beautiful analogy. I love the way you said that.
Well, and I appreciate hearing that too, because never has that door been closed and locked in my mind. You know, there's always that it wants to creep open, but your sensitivities about your own emotional makeup is kind of the view on when that door is starting to open up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the mirroring, I think, of both of those analogies.
You know, well, I love what you're saying, Kevin and Kathy, you relate to this just from your work. I think for a lot of folks, you know, whether it's first responders and physicians, the people in the military, that door is closed and they don't know how to open it up. Or when it opens up, it's overwhelming. And one of the things that maybe you can say about this, because I think exactly like in the crisis, where for most executives that you're dealing with and people that I'm dealing with, there's not a crisis like that. I mean, when you're running into a fire or there's an incident, yes, you know, that's important, but you have the time to think. But I think what's interesting about your approach is how much you talk about empathy as a leadership tool, especially, you know, in some of these darkest hours, you know, and maybe you come in and around crisis situations, around crisis communication. So say a little bit about that. And I imagine some of all our work is in letting people open the door at the right time, close the door at the right time.
Yes. Empathy is just so important. The power of connection that is created with authentic empathy is significant. And of course, you know, the two of you could speak for, you know, a long time about that. And I recognized it as a young fire chief and then as a CEO, the power of empathy. And one of the things that I think is lost, kind of going back to what we spoke about earlier, is that empathy was not an aspired trait of our chief executives. It just hasn't been for a long time. It's starting to become more now. But being empathetic and going about your business with empathy is extremely important. And I draw a clear distinction between sympathy and empathy. You know, with empathy, I'm emotionally engaged in whatever that happens to be. The sympathy, at least the way I look at it, is I have a recognition, I'm sorry that that's going on, and that's the end of it. But this notion of empathy, particularly if it's authentic, and authentic is a very, very interesting thing to talk about. But empathy is so powerful in garnering support for what you want to do, a sense of commitment to the cause, to the mission of the organization, commitment to you as the leader. And so I try to bring empathy into everything that I do. But I just don't pull it out of my bag of tricks at one particular moment to try and stimulate a response from somebody. Yeah. But it has to be who I am as an individual. And that's why I think leadership really all starts here. Leadership is not something you do, it's something you are. It's a noun, not a verb. The verbs will come. The fruit will come from it.
Well, you said that beautifully, and I think this is a good opportunity to go to a quick break. And when we come back, Kevin, let's talk about how we prepare leaders differently than traditional business training has allowed us to do so that they can stay human rather than becoming a reaction machine. Don't go away. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practices of Top Performers. We're talking with Kevin Crawford, who's been a top performer throughout his career in a variety of roles as city manager, fire chief, CEO, and is really picking some of these key aspects that so resonate with me, and I'm sure Kathy and hopefully our audience, around these basic skills of understanding yourself, managing yourself, and then it helps you understand others, manage others. So this idea in the middle of a crisis, let's say it's a fire, city emergency, could be a corporate meltdown. How do you stay human rather than being this reactive machine? And if we go back to what we talked about earlier, fast thinking is that reactive, that impulsive. That's all of us, 98% of the time. And Kat, you've heard me say this, Kevin, you heard me say this. If you stay on autopilot, you stay average. That's that reactive. So what's some tools, tips, Kevin, about in the midst of all that, how do you stay human?
I think the answer to that is you've got to marry empathy. So I think of times where, I've been commanding something and it is rapid fire and you got to take in data real quickly and you got to make a decision and respond real quickly. But if empathy has been a cornerstone of who you are as an individual and a cornerstone of your leadership, then all that gets done with a slight little empathetic flair and tone, a smile, a nod, a pat on the back. We got this. You've got this. A note of encouragement. The power of leadership is the power of connecting with other people. And what is so lost, I think, in leadership today, although I'd say, as we've said earlier on in the show, that, we're starting to see some change in that. But leadership is all about humanity. It's all about humanity. And so once you really understand that that's what it's about, and yes, you have other responsibilities that you have to do, none of them, are removed from the table. But the most important thing, and the way it all gets done, is with this person connecting with this person. And so when it comes to leadership, my definition of leadership is a little bit unique from a lot of folks. And for some, I'm sure it resonates. For others, it may not resonate, but it works for me. And that is that leadership is this authentic expression of who I am that results in another hunk of humanity, another person or group of people, seeing their potential met or performing at a higher level.
That's beautiful. And, I think all of us have been influenced by Howard Gardner and one of my mentors, Warren Bennis, one of the pioneers in leadership, by just doing what Relly and I do as coaches. I'm sure you do too, Kevin, which is just ask the powerful questions on a personal level. Who are you? How can I support your success? What is it that you see yourself doing in the next 3 to 5 years that I can help shape? Just asking the powerful questions for that connection that you so beautifully articulated. I also want to make sure the audience knows how to reach you, Kevin, and it's kevincrawfordconsulting.com. I'll say that again, kevincrawfordconsulting.com.
So Kevin, I'm going to ask just about one of the things that you talk about is vulnerability and humility. We're hitting all the highlights. We got empathy, we got vulnerability, we got humility, psychological safety. But as a leader, as in a crisis, how do you use that vulnerability and humility? And maybe you can give us, an example of that. your pull out from there?
Vulnerability has always been my little secret sauce.
That's great.
And it is so powerful in giving a sense of empowerment and confidence with those that you're working with, whether it's a crisis or not. And here's the example that really made it all come to mind for me. Early in the career, running a executive staff meeting, or setting up this new executive staff meeting or team that I just inherited. You know, we always want to meet on purpose, right? We want to have real clarity as to why we're meeting. And then it's really important to establish ground rules. And I thought to myself, when we were rolling out ground rules, I said, if you ever see me not living up to the rules that we have all decided, then you all have slapping authority. Come into my office and make it clear to me that I missed what we agreed to here was going to be the way we were going to conduct ourselves. And it wasn't until later on that I really recognized that vulnerability had so much power. So the vulnerability is putting yourself kind of on that altar of risk. Okay. You're exposing yourself to that, but that is so powerful in the eyes of those that are in the organization, those people that you're leading. They're saying, okay, if he's willing to authentically, and everything has to be authentic, to kind of position themselves to say, if I get it wrong, you have permission to call me on it. And you can take that all across the board. And so it's the secret sauce for me, because in everything I do, every instruction I give, every order on the fire ground, or wherever, it all got sprinkled with vulnerability, because I never wanted them to feel that it was top-down direction. It might have been direction, but it was all sprinkled with this. If I get it right, you've got permission to set the record straight with me. Super powerful. Humility, not thinking of ourselves greater than we ought, is what humility is all about. But again, as we said earlier on, we have built a culture of expectation that those that are sitting in those seats are not humble and would never show vulnerability.
Yeah.
They've got this mental picture of somebody that sits in those seats. In fact, there was a military gentleman a long time ago. I think he was a colonel, and for some reason he was within earshot, and he heard one of these vulnerability statements that I made, and he chewed me out up one side and down the other for being vulnerable. But even the military has changed over time, and Kathy can certainly, speak to that. Vulnerability is playing even a bigger part in the military, but vulnerability is so powerful. But it's a courageous act. It's a tough act.
Yeah.
Going back to being courageous, leadership is a courageous act. Looking inside with a clear lens on how you think and your paradigms is a courageous act. Vulnerability, a courageous act. Yeah. Super powerful, though.
And don't you think communicating hope, especially when things look so bleak, is also one of those tremendously authentic and courageous acts?
It is, especially in times of crisis. Yeah. What gets taken away with a crisis is security and safety. That goes away. And so then you have a group of people that are feeling out of sorts, disjointed. They're concerned about the future. Okay. That brings on all kinds of emotions. And so whoever that person is that's running that organization, they need to give hope to that individual. And first, it starts with them as an individual, but their process is very, very important. If they have a process to deal with this new environment, this crisis, it gives a sense of hope. But one of the responsibilities of the person that is sitting at the top of that food chain, as they say, is to give hope for people out there that don't have hope in the time of crisis. They need to be able to anchor in, okay, I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I know that they know the direction that we need to go in, and I have confidence that they will get us there.
Kevin, that's so well spoken. And going back to Kat, what you were talking about as far as trust, and Gallup talked about what do followers want the most now, and the top two are hope, exactly like you said, Kevin, and trust. And again, you could see those as soft, but in this kind of VUCA Bani world, that's what people want to know. And you go back to your thoughts and your brain. Okay, this person I trust, and this person kind of sees the future, and I can see a light, that we can go through, even though I may not have it. And so that's, so important.
And
Before we,
Ralph, yeah, before we say goodbye, I just want to say that people are shifting away from the soft skills to calling them power skills.
yeah,
Right. And I love that. So I just wanted to make sure that as we manage our thoughts, we recognize these as powerful, right? And not necessarily soft.
So Kevin, we got a couple minutes. Let's ask you a couple of our key questions in the lightning round, and then I'm going to maybe ask you kind of what, in a crisis, what's your go-to? But first of all, if you just completed the sentence, and you already said this, but see if you say the same thing. Leadership is.
Yeah, I hope I say the same thing. Leadership is the authentic self-expression of an individual that enhances performance or potential in someone else,
Yep.
or a group of people. And so it all starts with me. And I like the definition. Perhaps I'm not making this a lightning round, or because I'm giving too much explanation, but I love that because it gives space for anybody in the organizations that I've been a part of to be a leader. And I like that.
That's beautiful. And I in a similar way, what I like to say is a leader shines the spotlight on those individuals, their strengths and their abilities. And so that is important. All right, so we got that. And then at work, it's all about
Enjoyment at carrying out the mission.
okay, beautiful. And then during the workday, because we only hit a little bit on self-management, but wellness is big with that. What's the best way that you recharge or did recharge during the workday? I mean, to kind of get back your center, get back your energy.
Get out of the office.
Okay.
Walk around, talk to people, connect with them, hear their stories, even get outside. Got to get out of that office.
That's beautiful. And then one of the things in the book that Kathy and I have together, Emotional Brilliance, we talk about your go-to. And in the midst, where do you go to? And Kathy and I have talked about this. For me, in the moment, if I'm feeling, I don't know which way to go, I go to curiosity. And Kat, you said when we talked about that, you go to adaptability, and anything resonate, where would you go, Kevin, in the moment? Kind of like your go-to. Like what's your go-to that you pull out, you beckon, you bring it forward, you shine the light on it in the moment?
It's that mental picture that we talked about earlier of closing the door on the emotions. Because when it's bleak and it's confusing and I don't know what's going on, my emotions are triggered and they need to be shut. I need to bring objectivity to it.
Beautiful.
Well, we are getting here to the very end of the show. I just want to make sure that for more information on Kevin Crawford. You go to kevincrawfordconsulting.com. It's always a pleasure having our audience here with us. And thank you so much for tuning in to tune up your performance with leadership development news. Any final words, Relly or Kevin?
Go ahead, Kevin. I'll put it up to you. Yeah.
Well, I felt somewhat like a donkey at the Kentucky Derby with the two of you. So it has been a pleasure. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to having more of these kind of conversations.
Yes. I love it. Well, as a donkey, you did really well. So anyway, thank you. And tune in to tune up your performance on Leadership Development News.
That's surely a visual to close with. Bye, everybody. Love you.